traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the neutral peoples of the Grand River. This territory is supposed to be under the Haldeman Treaty and the Dish with One Spoon Treaty. But the government, of course, has dispossessed the people of their traditional land, and it's caused a great injustice, so we acknowledge that. I would also, I'm just going to make sure I've got my PowerPoint presentation here. Hopefully, okay, let's see. Oh, this way? Down? No.
Yeah, we can see the PowerPoint quite clearly.
Okay, I just am trying to move. Okay, there we go. I would also like to begin by acknowledging the conflicts that are taking place in the world right now. And let's just take a moment to reflect on the genocide that is unfolding in Gaza. Over 40,000 people have been killed. Israelis have also been killed. Over 74,000 injured. We've also got the conflict in Ukraine. Russians and Ukrainians are dying in Sudan and in Somalia and the DRC as well. The event tonight is being organized and financed by LSPIRG, the Laurier Student Public Interest Research Group. I encourage people to follow them on Twitter, and also to bring to your attention that there is funding available. If you are doing an activity, you can apply for funding with LSPIRG. So I'm very grateful for LSPIRG's sponsorship of this event this evening. The event is also endorsed by the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, and Bianca at CFPI is kindly helping to do the Zoom this evening. I am going to pass around a sign-up sheet. There is a fantastic e-newsletter every month that comes out from the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute. So if you would like to put your name and email and check the box and join the monthly e-newsletter, please do so. There is also a box for the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace. I am also a member of the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace and the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom Canada that are also sponsoring this event tonight, and they have a great e-newsletter that you can join. So I will pass this around, and there are some great, there's great literature over there and free buttons that you can take. Just to tell you quickly that VOW and WILP are feminist national peace organizations for the younger Laurier students. We send a delegation every year to the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women conference. We also have access to other UN meetings. So if you would like to one day come to New York and on a delegation, we encourage you to join us and to come along. So we have students right now from across the country who are in New York on our delegation, meeting with diplomats and involved in that amazing opportunity. We're also part of the Women, Peace and Security Network Canada. We do lots of amazing events, and we have all of these great campaigns that we do against military spending, trying to stop war, and getting Canada to take seriously disarmament, and calling for demilitarization for decarbonization. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our campaigns, and then I'm going to end with some upcoming events. I'm doing this now at the beginning of this program because after Kevin speaks, we are going to stop the live recording with Zoom, and then we'll open the floor to you. So just really quickly, VOW and WILP launched a campaign, Starving for Gaza. You can join that and participate with us. We also have a petition. You can go to our websites to find out more, to call for Canada to stop arming Israel. We still need to do work on that, despite the motion that was passed on Monday and resuming funding to UNRWA. We also have a campaign with the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network to call for Canada to get out of the Red Sea and to stop bombing Yemen. We also have a briefing and a petition to our members of parliament to stop arming Ukraine and to call for negotiations to end the war. We've been working on it for a decade to try to get Canada to stop buying fossil fuel powered weapon systems like the F-35. We think instead that should be invested in healthcare and education and climate action. This is a picture of us with our campaign, demilitarize, decarbonize, stop the war, stop the warming. Just a few facts to bring to your attention to help set the stage for Kevin's presentation. This is Canadian carbon emissions over the past 60 years, so it's gone up and up and up. In November, our Commissioner for Environment and Sustainable Development said that Canada has failed to meet every single target under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. The Climate Action Tracker has said Canada's progress is highly insufficient, so we are very concerned about our failure to take action on the climate crisis. And one of the reasons for that is the fact that the federal government is spending so much money on militarism and investing in this carbon-intensive military instead of climate action. So this is military spending over the past 60 years, and it's at a record high. I just want to show you a few more graphs from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. This is their annual report on military spending, and you can see the United States is first at $877 billion. And then if you scroll your finger down, you can see Russia is about 1/10 of that. Keep scrolling your finger down and you find Canada. We're 14th highest at $27 billion, that's US. And if you convert that to Canadian, it's about $36 billion. So we are 14th highest in the world. And the pressure to increase military spending comes from NATO. In the past 9 years, our military spending has gone up by 95% to $39 billion. Yeah, it should be invested in other ways. Just to compare and contrast our spending on the Department of National Defense, this is $31 billion. This is just for the department. It doesn't include all military spending, but compare it to the Department of Environment and Climate Change at $2 billion. So we think that our priorities are all wrong, and it's reflected by our budget. I also want to bring to your attention this report from CIPRI. This is the annual arms transfer reports. Canada is 16th highest in the world for weapons exports, and we're sending weapons to Saudi Arabia, to Israel, to Ukraine, to Bahrain, to many other countries, and it's fueling conflict and it's exacerbating the climate emergency. Now you might think to yourself, well, with all of this military spending, I thought we were a peacekeeping country. Well, we're not. This is the latest statistics from the UN Peacekeeping Office. Canada is ranked 69. We only have about 38 peacekeepers out of a military force of 85,000 people. So we haven't been doing peacekeeping seriously in the past 30 years. And there you can see the United States. Oh, that should be the United States. The largest military on the planet is ranked 77. So what we have been engaged in, it is a lot of war making, and Kevin is going to talk about this in a moment, but just to say that this month is the 25th anniversary of Canada participating in an illegal NATO operation bombing Yugoslavia, and it has led to 25 years of really horrendous war making: Syria, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, and now Ukraine, and in Gaza. And it's for all of this war making that Canada lost its bid to join the UN Security Council in 2010 and 2020. I'd like to close with some upcoming events to let you know about in order to try to shift this from this war economy, this highly militarized foreign policy. We have planned an On to Ottawa peace caravan this May. So we have carpools, people on trains, people walking from coast to coast and converging in Ottawa at the end of May, May 28th, the day before the big arms show in Ottawa. So the 29th and 30th will be CANSEC. This is the largest arms fair in North America, and we are going to protest and shut it down. We would love for you to join us, because we think Canada shouldn't be exporting weapons and violence, and it should be working on global solidarity and cooperation. So this is us outside of CANSEC a couple of years ago. We'd love for you to be there. This, some more pictures. We have a campaign, Feminists Against Militarism, Women Say No to NATO. This is the 75th anniversary of NATO. We're very much opposed to it, and we're calling for its abolition. NATO is a climate criminal, and we're also part of something that just started a year ago called the Global Women for Peace United Against NATO. There are some great events taking place soon with that. And another place that we're going to be converging is in Washington, D.C. in July. This is the 75th anniversary of the NATO alliance, and we, again, are going to be protesting with people around the world that are coming to that. And then also to let you know that just down the hall next week, same time, we are going to be having a book launch with Eve Engler. And we have a book that we are going to be giving away at the end of this event tonight. So now I am very pleased to turn it over to Kevin MacKay, a good friend and academic, and I'm going to read his bio. He is a professor at Mohawk College in Hamilton and serves as vice president of the Mohawk Faculty Union. He researches, writes, and teaches on the subjects of civilization collapse, political transformation, and global systemic risk. His recent book, Radical Transformation, Oligarchy, Collapse, and the Crisis of Civilization, was published by Between the Lines Book. He is currently working on a book entitled A New Ecological Politics with Oregon State University. And in 2004, Kevin founded the Sky Dragon Community Development Cooperative, a nonprofit that operates a community center in downtown Hamilton and does really incredible work. So thank you very much, Kevin, for coming from Hamilton to speak to us. And let's make sure, okay, now we're going to screen share again, and we are going to go like this, and hopefully that is good.
Thank you so much, Tamara, for that lovely introduction. Hey folks, great to see everyone here. I know it's bitter cold outside, so I am impressed that people braved that to come out to talk, or to hear a talk, I should say, about some pretty heavy subjects. But I think subjects that it's incredibly important that we do have open discussion, debate, dialogue about. And part of the reason why I'm doing this talk, why Tamara and I were discussing this and sort of put this together, is simply because there hasn't been enough open debate, dialogue, and discussion of Canada's foreign policy, in particular with regards to two of the most horrendous conflicts that we've seen in decades, the genocide in Palestine and the war in Ukraine. And of course, Canada is involved in both of these, along with its allies. So that's why this lecture is called On the Wrong Side of History, Canada, Imperialism, and the Global Geopolitical Realignment. So as Tamara mentioned, in terms of the book that I wrote, I tend to study big picture civilization dynamics. And so I wrote a book in 2016 about the collapse of industrial civilization. Certainly not the only person who's been talking about this. There's a growing number of ecologists, climate scientists, geologists, you name it, political scientists, who are talking seriously about the possibility of civilization collapse. And so I think that it's not an overstatement to say that today we are living in an age of crisis. And there's a number of threats that are arguably existential for us right now. Obviously, the threat of nuclear war, we're very, very close to this, much closer than we should ever want to come in terms of what's going on in Ukraine. We are dealing with ecosystem collapse, several different ecosystems throughout the planet. The oceans are in crisis, forests are in crisis, soil, fresh water, you name it. Everywhere you look, planetary systems are under deep stress. Species extinction as well. We are in a sixth mass extinction event. So biodiversity loss is a huge challenge. We all know about climate change, very important. A global pandemic, the threat of a much more serious pandemic looms, especially if we are doing advanced gain of function research, extremely dangerous research in labs, which we know is still happening. The threat of something being released is incredibly real. And also the whole threat of AI, right? And so, to me, these are different, right? Some of these crises are ecological, some of them are more, you'd say, technological, some of them are more political in nature. But at the end of the day, they all necessitate a response. Okay, so if we're going to confront this age of crisis, if we're going to deal with these various existential threats, we have to come together as a human society, right? We have to come together in international cooperation, and you have to start harnessing the wealth of our societies for human need and for ecological sustainability. So we basically need to change course in a very fundamental way. And again, global democracy, this idea of coming together as various countries, as peoples from around the world, is incredibly important. And of course, unfortunately today, what we see is really the polar opposite of that. Instead, we see the polarization of global politics into two hostile blocs, a Western bloc and then one oriented around BRICS nations. We see the war in Ukraine, the genocide in Palestine. We see the threat of escalating conflict in the South China Sea around Taiwan. And we see increasing authoritarianism in countries in the West, in Russia and China, and all of these countries that are participating in this escalating global conflict. This sort of conflict breeds authoritarianism within countries as countries become more militarized, as countries crack down on media, on dissent, on free expression. So this is another really distressing thing that we're seeing today. And we're seeing growing political and economic instability. So again, we're not where we need to be. If we need to head towards global democracy to deal with the crises we're facing, then we have to really look at what's going on and how we change things. And so what I'm going to argue in this talk is that in order to change things fundamentally, we first have to understand the world we exist within, this international order. Why are these conflicts raging? Why is there this polarization happening? And another important thing we really need to do is we need to counter false narratives that are spun by Western governments, Western corporate media, and including in Canada. Canada is just as bad as any of the other countries in Europe right now when it comes to not telling the Canadian people what's really going on, and then not enabling us to make good decisions, and especially in terms of how we relate to other countries around the world. So I'd like to talk just a little bit about the world system as we know it today. And I'd like to start by saying that, you know, if you look at the behavior of states, of nation states, okay? So for about 6,000 years, we've had these political formations, states, large groups of people controlling, you know, large areas, various levels of government. You know, we know the characteristics of the state. And I would say that if you look at the behavior of states, they can best be described through what's known as a realist perspective. Okay, and what does this mean? It means that states tend to want to preserve their sovereignty and protect their vital interests. Okay? And moreover, powerful states, so states that are particularly large and wealthy, they tend to want to expand their power in relation to other states. So powerful states today obviously would be the United States, France, China, Russia, Britain, Iran. I mean, there are powerful states, right? They have resources, they have large militaries, they have large populations. Canada, we would say today, is like a middle power. It's obviously not a great power. However, as we're going to see a little later in the talk, Canada still does exert its power outside of its borders against other countries. So powerful states tend to be imperialist in nature, which means they tend to try to dominate other states politically, economically, and militarily. Super powerful states can also really ramp up this sort of dominance-seeking behavior and pursue ever-expanding hegemony and basically seek to vanquish all of their rivals. And this is really what the world has been like for the past couple of decades, with the United States trying to exert global hegemony, trying to become the most powerful country on the planet, which arguably it has been for a number of decades. So this whole configuration of these states all trying to protect their interests, powerful states trying to grow their power, trying to exert it over less powerful countries. This leads to a condition that realist theorists call international anarchy, okay? And not the good kind of anarchy, not the groovy kind of let's all get together and do things on our own and sustain each other and all that sort of stuff. They mean anarchy in the sense that there is no actual rule of law internationally. You know, there is no democracy, there is no global order to rein in powerful states, right? And of course, this is a dangerous state of affairs. International relations tend to pivot between either a balance of power among powerful states, which is what we call multipolarity, or else, again, one state seeking hegemony, superpower hegemony, which we call unipolarity. And so basically we have an unstable world system full of shifting alliances, conflict, and warfare. This is obviously the world that we're seeing today. Now, you could describe states as acting in a realist manner, and yet I think that what realist theories of state behavior miss is that there are reasons why states act this way, okay? And the reason is because modern states are largely captive to oligarchy, right? To the interests of a wealthy and powerful elite, okay? And what happens in a situation of oligarchy is states tend to exert these three characteristics. First of all, political domination. So this is within the state. What this means is that if you have a small, wealthy, powerful elite that's trying to control that society, they do that through political domination. Obviously, they have to because they're a small group, right? They're always outnumbered by the people they're trying to dominate. So there you see again, you see authoritarian structures, you see police forces, you see militaries, you see coercive laws and state apparatuses. This is a characteristic of oligarchic states. You also see economic exploitation. You know, wealthy and powerful elites become wealthy and powerful because they extract wealth from, you know, the subordinate folks within their society, from among the working class. You know, in ancient history, it was among slaves as well. I mean, this is basically what state elites have done for centuries, for millennia, actually. And another aspect of oligarchic states is that they tend to lead to an ecological destruction. And this is because of the overuse of resources. First of all, through wealth extraction, but also through territorial expansion. So remember I talked earlier on about powerful states tend to want to expand their footprint. They tend to want to grow and suck up other territories and terrains. This leads to sort of constant war making, has a devastating ecological impact. That's why I love Tamara's research so much, linking ecological impacts with militarism and imperialism, because the connection is very much there. The connection is especially there when you look at ancient states and ancient civilization collapse. Pandemic warfare and ecological crisis go hand in hand before a state collapses, or before an empire collapses, like the Roman Empire, for instance. So if we look at today's modern oligarchic states, they tend to behave in a kind of a schizoid fashion. In terms of their external relations, they operate in a way that Karl Marx would have called primitive accumulation, or Adam Smith would have called this mercantilism. This is a way of interacting with other states, economically speaking, where you basically try to take their resources through force, okay? So this isn't some sort of, you know, myth of free market competition and, you know, all that sort of stuff. Like that is literally a myth when you look at international relations. Powerful states dominate weaker states, and they extract wealth from them. This is what, you know, colonial empires did for hundreds of years. However, internally, oligarchic states tend to operate under what we would call today neoliberal capitalism. And what that means is we have a wealthy and powerful elite, for instance, in a country like Canada, the United States, that is seeking to extract more and more wealth from social infrastructure, from our healthcare systems, from our food systems, from education, you know, basically looking for any way to sort of maximize profits. So we have these sort of two ways of operating within states. One model internally, neoliberalism, but externally, it really is this imperialist model of powerful states doing more like a smash and grab version of economics, which is that if I'm powerful, I take your stuff, right? It really is that blatant. And I just want to say here too, before, you know, these forces may rule modern states, but of course they're not the only forces that are active. These forces of oligarchy, of political exploitation, economic exploitation, political domination, these forces are countered by democratic forces, okay? You know, to varying degrees in different societies, democratic forces of people's movements do have power, do exert influence on states, and we can sometimes change them in really fantastic and inspiring ways. So, and I think these forces are where our hope lies, and I'm going to return to them at the end of the talk. So I don't want to make it seem like It's all entirely bleak. However, the controlling interests, oligarchy. I think you can make that argument. Even in a country like Canada, we would like to say that we're a democracy. We would tout that loudly. The United States likes to talk about itself being a democracy all the time. And yet we know that practically speaking, money is an incredibly powerful force in our electoral process. It's really, really difficult to get fundamental change through our democratic institutions. That's a hallmark of oligarchy. So now if we want to understand the world today as it exists right now, these conflicts that are occurring, we have to look at a specific constellation of powerful oligarchic states. And this is what I've called in the lecture, the Western Project. And so the Western Project, you could also call it the West or the collective West. There's different names for this. This is really a force that has been structuring the world system easily for the past 400 years. And so the Western Project has its roots in colonialism, obviously European colonialism. Again, you know, from the 17th century on, you have various European powers building empires, spreading out over the globe, conquering other societies, establishing exploitative economic relationships with them, in certain cases outright colonizing those countries. And so you have, you know, at a certain point, much of Africa, Asia, and South America completely subjugated, right? Put into these subordinate relationships to European empires, and again, having their wealth extracted, also having incredibly corrupt political systems installed in these countries too, the echo of which lasts generations after these countries actually gained independence. So incredibly dysfunctional systems are created in these colonized countries. What you have, of course, is in North America and Australia, you have countries that were almost, you know, the indigenous population was almost completely annihilated through acts of genocide. And these countries become populated by Europeans. They gain independence early and they become a part of this colonial constellation of forces. They become a part of the collective West, North America, Australia. And of course, North America really comes to dominate it after a while. So core states that form the Western Project today include the NATO countries, Australia, but also Japan, South Korea, and I think you could argue that Israel is also part of this constellation of forces. And again, major economic powers today were formally subjugated, China and India, right? So they have these histories, they have this experience of colonial exploitation. Well, sometimes we forget that in the West, right? We forget that there are these, peoples in other parts of the world don't necessarily have short memories. They understand what it was like, for instance, for the British to live under the Raj, right? Or for China to suffer 100 years of humiliation, right? Being dominated by Western powers. So the other thing about the Western Project that I have to point out is that it is always internally competitive. So what I mean by this is you have European empires expanding out in the age of colonialism. It's literally a scramble to try and grab up the rest of the world, get what colonies they can, and yet they're constantly competing and warring against each other. So that's a hallmark of the Western Project. Externally predatory, internally competitive. Constantly vying for dominance among them. And what does this lead to? Well, World War I, right? Which is a naked competition between European colonial empires. And really, World War II is just a continuation of that. And of course, these conflicts, millions and millions of people dying, massive destruction. So this is the outcome. This is definitely the outcome of the Western Project. So if we want to understand more recently, we've really got to look at the post-World War II system, okay? Because after World War II, again, you have this kind of part two of this scramble of European powers to maintain their colonies, maintain their empires. It leads to this global conflagration. And emerging from World War II, the United States emerges as the most powerful country on the planet, right? I mean, apart from Pearl Harbor, it isn't directly attacked. It has its economy and infrastructure intact, its manufacturing base intact. And so it is the most powerful country in the world. And it's really interesting that you have this moment in the United States where they move from being simply a regional power, in ways content with being a regional power, and then all of a sudden you see this really imperialist ideology grab hold of the states. And I want to bring up this quote here because I think this is a really interesting quote. This is from George Kennan, who was in the US State Department, okay? And this is an internal memo, 1948, so just a couple years after the end of World War II. He's saying this, talking to his fellow State Department apparatchiks. We have about 50% of the world's wealth, but only 6.3% of its population. In this situation, we cannot fail to be the object of envy and resentment. Our real task in the coming period is to devise a pattern of relationships which will permit us to maintain this position of disparity without positive detriment to our national security. To do so, we will have to dispense with all sentimentality and daydreaming, and our attention will have to be concentrated everywhere on our immediate national objectives. We need not deceive ourselves that we can afford today the luxury of altruism and world benefaction. This is as blunt as it gets, right? So basically you have the United States realizing, wow, we're the most powerful country in the world. We have tons of wealth, we have a very small population. Obviously, they're not stupid. They know what's going to happen. The rest of the world is going to look at them with hostility, with disdain, right? And so they realize, you know what? I mean, there could have been two responses in this situation. One response could have been like, wow, let's use our wealth and power to like bring development to the world and build global democracy and all this sort of stuff. But no, what they're basically saying, and this is of course what we did, is we are going to double down on empire, on hegemony. We're going to try to create a pattern of relationships, i.e. we're going to try to control the global political and economic landscape to maintain our dominance, to maintain our wealth and disparity. It's that blatant. And I'm telling you, that policy explains US foreign policy, or that statement explains US foreign policy from then on, really. So what happens after World War II? Well, the United States is the most powerful country. Former European colonies gained independence. However, a lot of them remained subservient to the Western project. And you certainly saw this, for instance, just one example is France and the African colonies, right? Yeah, the African colonies got independence, but France maintained for many, many years. This only is unraveled recently. Control over their currency, control over their economy, control over the resources that were being extracted from those countries. So again, independence light, a lot of countries gained after World War II. And the US emerges as the new leader of the Western project in what's known as a special relationship with the UK, which of course was the former real string puller. And of course, we also, after World War II, lurched right into a Cold War because you have another powerful center of the Soviet Union. You also have China. And for a while, they are together as kind of like the Eastern Bloc until there's the Sino-Soviet split and those countries become independent of each other. So you do have other power centers, but again, the United States and the collective West is the most powerful center. You also during this time have the Arab nations deliberately divided, deliberately prevented from unifying the British Empire, which was just probably one of the most deceitful organizations that's ever existed on the face of the earth in human history. Made all sorts of promises to the Arab states during the war about, there's going to be a greater Syria, you're going to be able to unify, and none of that came to pass. Instead, Sykes-Picot came to pass. Countries were divided up. This is where the Palestinians as well at the time were promised, that they were going to have a viable state after they ceased being a British mandate. All of those promises basically up in smoke. During this time as well, you have obviously conflict between the various power centers. Between NATO, the Soviet Union, and China. There's conflict over the control of post-war Germany first. There's the Korean War, an absolutely brutal war fought between 1950 and 1953. The Suez Crisis, Egypt, and of course the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. And so this Cold War, it's interesting we call it was actually very hot in a lot of ways. Lots of conflict, lots of violence. But the Western Bloc was able to achieve dominance through structuring international institutions in its favor, first of all. So it wasn't all bombs and fighter planes and submarines and missiles and whatnot. A lot of the dominance of the Western Bloc was through financial and political control of global institutions. And it's very, very effective. You know, the Cold War plays out until the Soviet Union breaks apart, collapses. And at this point, you really do get that sort of imperialist clique within the US government and decide it's time to go for growth. So you have, for instance, the Project for a New American Century, the neoconservatives within Washington. And these are the people who truly believe in American empire, who believe in a Pax Americana, and they really take control. I mean, they've always been a force, or that tendency has been a force in US politics since World War II, but it really asserts itself after the fall of the Soviet Union. And, you know, you have folks like Zbigniew Brzezinski, who very important figure in the US State Department, an advisor to a number of US presidents. And he openly says, you know, the most important thing we need to do from a US foreign policy perspective, if we want to maintain our global hegemony or dominance, the most important thing is we have to prevent a rival state from emerging in Eurasia. Very important, very clear about this. He says we have to prevent the Eurasian rival from emerging. And so, and another article he wrote, not in the Grand Chessboard. The Grand Chessboard, he talks a lot about Eurasia, but in a later article in Foreign Affairs, he actually talked about, you know, it'd be better if, for instance, Russia was broken up into several smaller countries, right? And that way, you know, he tries to sort of sell it as like, it'd be better for Russia, you know, it'd be easier to organize. There's so many different ethnic groups and stuff like that. And then he sort of says, and also, you know, it would ensure that there's no rival that emerges. So it was early on understood that the main barrier to this global hegemony was any kind of rival. So Russia, if it was a potential rival, needed to be destroyed. China, if it was a potential rival, needed to be destroyed or contained. Talk a little bit more about what that means. Dick Cheney also, you know, is on record as saying that, you know, Russia should be broken up, should be balkanized. So sometimes you'll hear this mentioned, and people will say, "Oh, that's just hyperbole," or "You're just sort of overstating the case." It's totally not. I mean, you can take it or leave it, but very powerful U.S. politicians have said on numerous occasions that they want to destroy Russia and break it up. So again, if you might think that might make a country a little paranoid, I think you'd be right. So I just want to talk a little bit about some of the strategies of domination that the collective West has used, that the Western project. So I mentioned before, you know, control of finance and trade. So this is, you know, using, for instance, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, you know, to trap poorer countries in cycles of debt that they can never get out of, right? And then once they're trapped in cycles of debt, you control them politically, control them economically. Also, election interference. I mean, the United States is the hands down champion at global electoral interference over and over again, all over the world. You know, the National Endowment for Democracy, USAID, the US State Department, like there's so many branches of the US government, CIA, obviously, right, that are so involved in elections in every other country. It's ridiculous. And it makes it a little bit absurd when then you look at the paranoia over Russian interference in the US election in 2016. And, you know, and maybe there was a couple bots or something like that, did some Facebook ads. I mean, it pales in comparison to what the United States does. And again, very effective. They're involved in elections all over the world. Also destabilization. So this could be economic destabilization. It could be covert operations, assassinations. You know, US government is involved in this, again, all over the world at a level that we've never seen before. And of course, there's military intervention too. When these other tools don't work, they're more than willing to bomb, to invade, to occupy, to do whatever it is they need to do. And this, of course, is where, you know, where NATO comes in as well. So what we've seen then over the last, you know, since World War II, in this period of unprecedented U.S. hegemony, is we've seen massive foreign intervention. And so I just want to throw this up, and this is something that I don't expect people to be able to read all these. There's a great book called Killing Hope. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of this book. William Bloom, you know, great professor in the U.S. And this book's gone through multiple reprintings, but the tragic thing is it needs to be reprinted every 4 years pretty much to keep up with. I think the last one was in 2014 that I have access to. It is, again, it is unbelievable the amount of times that the United States has been involved in destabilizing governments, overthrowing governments. It's just unbelievable. And so, again, this is part of the narrative that if you don't hear this, that a lot of the times, again, to think that, oh, maybe a country like China has legitimate security concerns when thinking about the States, or maybe a country like Russia has legitimate security concerns. Well, if you don't know this history, you might be like, well, that's ridiculous. What do you mean? The States would never do anything to that. I mean, NATO is just a defensive alliance, right? But if you understand this history, I mean, it is, every country needs to be worried about their sovereignty and their security and their safety if they go at all against U.S. Wishes, right, or wishes of the collective West. Now, Canada has also played a role as well, and I think as we are here in Canada, we need to talk about this as well. And there's been a number of different instances, and again, probably the best book for this is, and actually I think Yves' most recent book updates his analysis, but he wrote a great book called Black Book of Canadian Foreign Policy. I think that was back in 2010, and it's great. It goes through, I mean, it's horrific, but it's an excellent documenting of Canada's imperial involvements, right? Imperial entanglements. So for instance, we were instrumental in promoting the partition of Palestine and creating the state of Israel. The Harper government helped train and fund Israeli soldiers and police in the occupied Palestinian territories. We armed Israel in its 2006 invasion of Lebanon. We have a long history of military involvement in the Caribbean. Just between 1960 and 2008, the military intervened 26 times in the Caribbean. It wasn't unusual for Canada sent gunboats in the Caribbean just to sort of let people know that if they stepped on a line, if they elected the wrong person, if they enacted the wrong policy, if they didn't allow one of our mining corporations to do what it wanted, they knew that there was force behind those corporations. 1967, we helped occupy the Suez Canal, Egypt. Canadian mining corporations have been just really running amok in Latin America for the past couple of decades. Dominating the political processes, influencing elections, influencing policy, harassing and evicting Native communities, working with the Organization of American States to support right-wing governments. They've got environmental laws. We help support the attempted coups in Venezuela. So yeah, we're very involved. Of course, in 2001, we were really the key ally of the United States in its invasion and occupation of Afghanistan. Lasted until 2014. Again, it's a 14-year military occupation, illegal military occupation that Canada was involved in. In 2004, we helped overthrow the democratically elected president of Haiti, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, who was the candidate of Lavalas flood, sort of poor people's movement. And Aristide was doing all the wrong things. He was actually legislating on behalf of poor nations, so that was not okay. So we had to get rid of him. Canada played a big role in that. And if you look at today, in terms of the two conflicts that are most attracting our attention, justly so, Palestine and Ukraine, Canada is deeply involved. To date, Canada has committed over $9 billion to Ukraine, most of it for military needs. Through Operation Unifier, Canada has been training Ukrainian soldiers since 2015, including the neo-Nazi brigades, which we knew very well at the time that we were funding were in fact neo-Nazis. We're helping train Ukrainian F-16 fighter pilots. We've offered security guarantees recently to Ukraine. And in March, Defense Minister Bill Blair has even talked about sending non-combat troops to Ukraine. So we are deeply involved in that. In terms of Palestine, I mean, we were very, very late calling for a ceasefire. Canada should have been one of the early countries doing that, along with the rest of the world. We defunded UNRWA, and just recently it seems like we're going to walk that back, which is great. We support the assaults on Yemen as well, Operation Prosperity Guardian, which is really led by the US and UK. But again, we're showing on what side of history we are. Like the two most egregious colonial powers in the world are once more bombing, you know, people in the Middle East, and we're supporting, right? We're right there in lockstep. We've been selling arms to Israel. Again, we've been directly complicit in genocide. And again, it seems like there's been some movement on that recently, which is great. But you know, as Tamara suggested, there needs to be more done on that. And of course, we undermine the South African ICJ case and the ICJ ruling with this bizarre "we support the court, but we don't support the decision" stance, which is just ridiculous, right? So again, the wrong side of history in both of these points. And so, you know, what has the world of Western hegemony been like? Well, it's led to continuous warfare, the genocidal extermination of most of the world's indigenous peoples, the destruction of the biosphere, and the catastrophic alteration of our planetary atmosphere. This is what's been happening for the past couple of years. And the prime goal of the Western project has been to enforce an unequal, immoral global order for the purpose of enriching Western corporations and oligarchs. That's it. Working people in Western countries have often also been exploited in this, but they've also been able to access a small share of this ill-gotten wealth through achieving political independence, from former colonizers, in the case of Canada and the United States, through socialist political movements and parties, and through trade unions. So again, working people in the colonial powers, yeah, were able to extract a little bit of that wealth for themselves. But really, it's clear that the driving force between imperialism is class-based, right? And you can see this. So for example, Western capitalists were quick to offshore production. Okay, this is, you know, something that was happening in the 1980s. You know, as labor unions became more successful at gaining higher wages and benefits for workers in North American capitalists, I mean, we're just going to open up factories elsewhere, right? We're going to take your job, we're going to offshore it, you know. And so again, that's like, you could almost consider that to be treasonous on behalf of the capitalists in Canada or the United States. But it shows that they really don't have a lot of national sentiment, right? It's really just about class exploitation. And then also, if you look at the contemporary neoliberal model, right, in which corporations and elites seek to privatize and commodify every aspect of society, and to maximize the extraction of private profit from every social and public service. So that's the world of Western hegemony. That's what it has given us. Now, what we're seeing today, and this is why I think we're living in extraordinary times, we are seeing this model enter a state of crisis. We're seeing the global balance of power shift, like in a tectonic, historic way. We are seeing a geopolitical realignment. So that world of Western hegemony is failing. And it's not surprising that it's failing. If you think about what it's based on. If it's based on this idea that you can dominate all the other countries in the world, and you can also dominate and exploit your own populace, these are not stable. These don't have long-term viability. Right? These are things that are going to collapse eventually. This is what we're seeing. We're seeing the failure of Western hegemony. You know, China, for a while now, has been the largest economy in the world. When you look at purchasing power parity, which a lot of economists think is actually more meaningful than GDP to gauge the strength of an economy. You know, China and Russia now, especially as a result of the Ukraine conflict, have forged an incredibly close alliance. I would say even closer than the initial alliance between Communist China and Communist Russia after the Chinese Revolution. The BRICS economies are outgrowing the collective West. The BRICS is expanding. It's hard to keep up with all the new countries that want to join the BRICS. It's also clear that the economic and military war against Russia has utterly failed. Utterly failed. The West is losing on the battlefield, and the economic sanctions that were supposed to bring Russia to its knees have arguably made Russia stronger. So Russia's a militarily more powerful country than it was before the start of the war. It's economically more self-sufficient than it was. It's been a complete and utter disaster for the West. And repeated disastrous regime change wars have weakened the United States economically, militarily, and politically. There's a great organization, it's called the Cost of War Project, created by the Watson Institute for International Public Affairs at Brown University. So they keep a running tab of the financial and human cost of all the regime change wars the US has been involved in. And post 9/11 wars have directly killed over 940,000 people by their count, and have cost over $8 trillion. So this is a massive amount of wealth that's just been burned up, literally, in munitions, in death and violence, and destroyed infrastructure. US economist Jeffrey Sachs notes that since 2000, between 2000 and 2022, $15 trillion was added to the US national debt. So over half of that just came from wars. So again, it literally is crushing the country under debt in the United States, which is not sustainable, of course. And the US and the collective West are also becoming isolated more and more on the world stage. Politically isolated in its support for Israel's genocide against the Palestinian people. I mean, the US is really the sole barrier to a ceasefire. It keeps vetoing resolutions. There is no more soft power. The US used to talk about this as a key aspect of their leadership of the world. In their mind, they'd like to call it leadership of the free world. Right? And the idea is that, US has soft power because they're respected around the world. And there's been a lot of interesting commentary and articles recently that are suggesting that is just gone. Right? So now all it is just violence. That's all you have, right? And I think, if you study political systems, social systems, when the controlling force only has violence to rely on, that's not good. That doesn't last long. It leads obviously to lots of chaos and bloodshed and instability, but it also spells doom for that controlling interest. You can't run things out. Dollar hegemony is also being challenged by the BRICS countries. So dollar hegemony, just to really simplify this, one of the ways the Americans have been able to finance all these regime change wars for so many years is because they've had this deal with Saudi Arabia that oil transactions would only occur in US dollars. And what that meant is that countries all over the world, because of course oil is still really the essential energy commodity, it forced countries to always have US dollars in their treasuries. So to always be buying US treasury bonds. And so basically that has allowed the United States to just print as much money as it wants. Doesn't matter how big the debt gets, they just print billions and billions more because they know countries will always buy those dollars because they want them in their reserves, right? This is what we call dollar hegemony. This is being directly and openly challenged by the BRICS that are developing their own reserve currency. Right? And so this is the kind of thing, I don't want to be one of those, there's a lot of folks on YouTube who are always predicting the next financial collapse, and it's always like 2 weeks from now, it's all going to come crashing down. I don't want to be one of those people. Having said that, I think even really serious and sober, finance theorists will say that if dollar hegemony actually ends, that will, let's just say, it'll have a massive impact on US. Catastrophic. And that's actually coming. The BRICS have said that they're doing this, right? And again, the US knows they don't have the power to stop it. That ship has sailed. And again, what's going to happen when that massive economic shock hits the States? Political unrest, political instability. It's going to get really intense. Canada, being right beside them, are also going to be affected very seriously. So, enough about all the problems. I want to end by talking about how we, as people in the West, as people in Canada, as citizens here, how we can confront this crisis, how we can overcome it. So, we have to understand, we have to just accept the fact that multipolarity is here. It's not going away. We can't rewind the clock. And the only question is what Canada and the other Western project countries can do in the face of this new reality. If we continue down the road of belligerence and aggression, we risk a global thermonuclear war, the annihilation of life as we know it. Obviously, that's not a viable way forward. So we need a drastic change in course. First of all, the Western project, especially the neoconservative true believers that live equate within the United States government, it has to abandon its insane quest for global hegemony. It is literally impossible. It's impossible to rule the world. Most sane people see that and understand that. And one of the interesting things I found I watched Tucker Carlson's interview with Vladimir Putin. And I get the sense when I see Putin talk that he is a hardcore realist. In terms of how he views the world, right? You know, and not a sentimental man, that he really isn't. But at one point he was kind of like, what does the US think they're doing? Like, you clearly can't do that. It's impossible on a physics level, right? You just can't, you don't have enough people, you don't have enough resources, you don't have enough big enough army, you can't rule the world. You think people would figure this out. But certain elements within the United States still have to figure that out. We obviously need an immediate end to the Palestinian genocide and the Ukraine war, immediate end, immediate ceasefire in Palestine, immediate peace negotiations in Ukraine. We need a rapprochement between the Western project and the BRICS. You can't have the world descend into a new Cold War, which literally divides. Well, actually, it wouldn't divide humanity up. The collective West would be very much in the minority and very much isolated in relation to the rest of the world. We need a foreign policy based on diplomacy, on mutual respect for state sovereignty, and on cooperation. And this means that Canada should, in fact, I agree with Tamara, we should get out of military alliances like NATO, which are really just tools of intimidation and domination, right? And we also need to reform international institutions like the United Nations, make them truly democratic and reflective of the global majority. Again, you know, it's too much to get into right now. There's been a lot of great work done on possible reforms to the United Nations that could make it a much more democratic global body. So in order to do these things, we're going to have to reclaim democracy here at home in the West. Because political and economic elites in the United States, Canada, and in our allied countries will not make these changes of their own. Obviously, the Trudeau government isn't going to wake up one day and be like, oh, you get it, you're right, you know, we're going to stop funding Ukraine, we're going to call for, you know, we're going to put pressure on the states for a ceasefire. Like, they're just not going to do it. The people will have to force this change by organizing and taking back control of our political system and our economy. And so this is going to require us to unify movements in pursuit of a common goal, a peaceful, sustainable, democratic, and equitable society. And so this means that a lot of movements that before, you know, tend to operate in silos, right? The labor movement, the environment movement, you know, movements for equity and justice, you know, for women, LGBTQ2S+ folks, and also the peace movement. These movements need to realize their common cause. It's going to be very, very important. We're going to pull this off if we're going to challenge power within our countries and take power back. And you know, it's interesting. The left used to understand this. I'm from the left. I'm going to, you know, just be really, really open and honest about that. I'm a union leader. I'm somebody who comes from that world. And we used to understand the connection between domestic inequality and imperialism. We used to understand that those things were two sides of the same coin, right? You know, we understood this when we marched against the Vietnam War, against the Afghan War, against the Iraq War. We were really good at this, but it seems like that connection has been really lost recently. There's a real disconnect, it seems, among liberals and people on the left and quote-unquote progressives. They seem to have missed the whole connection between imperialism and domestic inequality. You know, many leftists and liberals support the NATO proxy war in Ukraine, for instance, and they even try to rationalize Israel's genocidal assault on Palestinians. And the root of this problem is that most people in Canada are ignorant of the history of Western imperialism. And so, you know, one of the critical things we need to do then is we need to dispel the myths of Western imperialism. If people don't understand the history, if they don't understand our country's complicity in things like colonialism, imperialism, warmongering, then it's hard to get them to understand that we need to make changes and to take the necessary action. You know, the sad thing is most Canadians think that, you know, our countries are democratic and free, no other countries in the world are, right? You know, Canada is a moral actor on the global stage. We're one of the good guys. You know, we like to think of ourselves, as the picture suggests, as peacekeepers. The United States and our other Western allies are moral actors. NATO is a defensive alliance. Countries like Russia, China, and Iran are hostile, backward, and threatening. You know, their leaders are hostile and amoral. Western countries are never aggressors. They only wage war reluctantly in defense of freedom, democracy, rights. Like, a lot of people think this, a lot of people talk to on a regular basis. Western governments and media are generally trustworthy, whereas any media or any government or any foreign head of state is immediately a liar. We hear this all the time about Xi Jinping or Putin or whatever else. So, this was a really powerful set of ideological assumptions that a lot of people in the West have. And it comes from government propaganda, obviously, and it also comes from corporate media. It's, two powerful forces in terms of disseminating information. And so if we want to contest this narrative, this sort of mystifying narrative about our foreign policy, we have to look at government, media, religious institutions, education. There are a lot of different avenues that we can engage in the struggle. So, just wrapping up in a little bit here. I just want to talk briefly about, before I end, some of the myths specifically around the Ukraine war and some of the myths specifically around the genocide. So again, we are spun a narrative about the Ukraine war all the time in Western media, right? And the narrative is pretty simple. Putin is an imperialist madman. He launched an unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. He's going to invade Europe right after. This is just a warm-up. Yeah, and he wants to rebuild the Soviet Union. This is just what you hear over and over again. So, okay, interesting. Become an academic with science. Okay, that's your argument. What evidence do you have for that? Well, first of all, we have to look at this idea that, like I said before, it is documented in writing, statements people have made, that senior political figures in the United States have expressed the desire to destroy Russia, to break it up, the Balkans. So again, maybe there's some reason for Russians to be a little bit nervous that way. Russia, and again, this is documented, asked to join NATO after the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's flat out denied, right? Russia also asked to create a joint missile defense strategy with the West. That was denied. Of course, the US then promised that, when the Soviet Union collapsed, Germany reunifies, NATO won't go 1 inch eastward. You all heard this. Of course, they immediately went back against that, and of course had a plan to already, even when they made that promise, they knew that they wanted to expand eastward. And of course, Russia had said repeatedly that Ukraine joining NATO was the ultimate red line, was an existential threat, an existential risk. And again, it's really interesting. You can sort of say, well, so what? I don't care. If you're NATO, well, you don't like it, but I mean, they kind of told you exactly what was going to happen, over and over again, for 2 decades, that this would lead to a major war, right? So this is why it's funny when they call it an unprovoked attack, or Jeffrey Sachs sort of says it's like the most provoked war ever in the past 20 or 30 years. Everyone on the inside knew this was coming. They knew the play that was being made by the State Department neocons, who were skillfully and relentlessly manipulating the situation to create this, right? Is basically what happened. The US directly intervened in Ukrainian politics in 2004. Right? Jerry rigged an election there, and of course, funded and supported the 2014 Maidan coup. There's Victoria Nuland's famous recorded call, where she picks the next president. She's also bragged about spending $5 billion in Ukraine in order to shift the political system and game it so that it becomes hostile to Russia. And then, probably most damningly, the US and Europe prevented peace in Ukraine by undermining the Minsk Accords and then preventing a negotiated peace in April of 2022. So it just seems like, even if you're not a fan of Vladimir Putin, which I can understand, but over and over and over again, it sure seemed like Russia was trying not to fight a war in Ukraine, right? And so that's a narrative we don't hear in the West. And that's a narrative that you see that, again, you can have issues with it. I tend to think Vladimir Putin is an authoritarian leader. I'm not particularly fond of that. I think there's horrendous oppression of LGBTQ folks in Russia. There's lots of things I can criticize Russia about, or China about, or Iran, or any of these other countries about. Having said that, there's just no evidence that Russia was spoiled for a war in Ukraine, or that we want to invade Europe. It's actually ridiculous. So I think that we just need to get better at saying. Similarly about the Palestinian genocide, a lot of Western media and even government pronouncements, they really fixate on this conflict starting on October 7th, 2020. That's when it started, right? Hamas launched this horrible terrorist attack, and yeah, it was a terrorist attack, yes. Israeli civilians died, that was horrendous. And they say Israel has the right to defend itself and to destroy Hamas. This is really important. Totally destroy Hamas, because Hamas is a terrorist organization. And of course, there's a lot missing from that narrative. First of all, the conflict goes back, you can trace it back even further. I start around the 1930s. When the Zionist movement began plotting to take over Palestine and ethnically cleanse the indigenous Palestinian population. And that is exactly what it was. It is that blatant. Of course, the founding of the state of Israel, you have over 700,000 Palestinians ethnically cleansed. Since 1967, Gaza and the West Bank have endured illegal Israeli military occupation in violation of international law and numerous UN resolutions. Israel has blockaded Gaza since 2007, continues to colonize Palestinian land in the West Bank, and of course, Israel has declared genocidal intent against Palestinians and is currently carrying out genocidal action. So again, this is a narrative we need to get out. So to close, I think it's really important right now, and I think this is why I'm really glad Tamara organized this event. Post-secondary institutions are really, there's a lot of important institutions in our societies. Post-secondary institutions are supposed to play an important role in being spaces of free speech, free and open dialogue, academic freedom, free inquiry. I hear you shaking, I know, you're shaking your head and I'm agreeing, because sadly they're not today, right? They're supposed to be these spaces, and they're really not. This is an example of, this is Laurier Zelensky addressing students at the University of Toronto. He was doing this whole speaking tour, virtual speaking tour in all these Canadian universities. So Canadian universities, sadly today, are central to perpetuating the narrative that justifies Western imperialism. Faculty members and students that speak out against it are suppressed, censored, silenced. Faculty members are disciplined and fired. Yeah, exactly. Fired. Students are being targeted. Student associations are being targeted. So it's a very, very serious state of affairs. And I would just argue that these actions actually undermine the very purpose of post-secondary education. The thing we're supposed to be all doing here, right? Which is actually looking honestly at the world to try to come up with the best possible solutions, to innovate, new and better ways of doing things. You have to look at reality to do this. And reality is being suppressed in this sense. However, I'm going to argue that colleges and universities can still be sites of important resistance. Faculty have academic freedom, they can use it, even though it's dangerous. They can speak up, speak out. Institutions are still nominally dedicated to free inquiry and the pursuit of truth. So, it's in their mandates that they're supposed to allow this stuff. We need to use that. We need to force them to act like that. And again, students are wonderfully attuned to social justice and also wonderfully willing to challenge authority. And we're also lucky that they tend to be that way. So again, there's a lot of potential change there. So we have to continue to organize faculty and student voices for peace on college and university campuses countrywide. And I know that's something I take very seriously. I know Tamara does. And there's a network of faculty and students across the country that do too. And we need to really, really up our game, I think, and reclaim these spaces as spaces of open dialogue. So I think I will leave there. And thank you very much, everyone, for coming out, for hearing the talk. And then I look forward to any conversations or discussion, questions.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And thank you to the people online. Thank you very much. We're going to stop the recording, but just as I'm saying goodbye to you online, I want to encourage you to sign up for the newsletter of the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, and also check out eveangler.com for his book tour because he's going to be speaking in cities across the country. So thanks very much for joining us, and thanks to CFPI for co-hosting the online program. Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Tamara. Thank you, Kevin. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Bianca. Bye.